I remember the first time someone asked me whether if I could go back in time and go through everything I had all over again, would I do it? Considering the person it's made me today. It's obviously a question I can't honestly answer, not knowing the alternative. But it did make me think a lot about who I am as a result of what happened to me. But knowing what I know now, being the person that I am, how much of my appreciation of life, ability to solve problems, adaptability, and stoicism was a result of such unfortunate events? There's no way to be truly certain, but if I had to hasten a guess, I'd say quite a bit. That might be because I've developed a skill of playing a character I like to call the Alchemist. So the Alchemist is a framing technique that seeks to transform negative life events into positive outcomes. When I got to the other side of losing my limbs, I certainly could have chosen to feel dejected about the situation, but I chose instead to frame the events in a positive way, a way that can turn adversity into an asset. This isn't about falsifying objective reality, it's about developing the skill of seeking potential positive outcomes.
So when I first tried walking up steps with prosthetic legs, it became impossible to do it the way I'd always done. And I learnt quickly that I had to turn my body sideways to the curb to get up a completely different way. Now, this could be seen as a negative, like I have to do everything differently and there's going to be a huge challenge here. Or it could be flipped to a positive, which is I now have to view every problem through a completely different lens. And how could that make me solve problems better than the average person? This is a cognitive restructuring akin completely to the Alchemist.
Everybody has moments like this in their lives, and it behooves us to pay close attention to them. This is not a question about lying to yourself about the pressures of life. The goal is not to make all negatives into positives in some metaphysical balance sheet. It's about making the choice to find a way to make the best you can out of something.
Anyone that knows me well knows that I largely regard what happened to me as a positive outcome. I treat my entire disability with one big alchemist technique. I genuinely think I'm more patient, pragmatic, and positive as a result of having gone through what I did.
So the Alchemist governs three main areas of adversity amelioration: research and development, innovation, and marketing. Research and development encourages you to learn from this mistake or failure, to avoid the same mistake in the future, or be aware of potential future threats. Mistakes are often seen as negative, but they provide valuable opportunity for growth and learning. By analyzing what went wrong and making improvements, individuals can turn these experiences into positive lessons for the future. Getting knocked back for a home loan might be a better lesson in budgeting than you'd get anywhere else. But you have the choice to view it as the former or the latter. As the artist Auguste Rodin said, nothing is a waste of time if you use the experience wisely. What a thinker. Even when it seems like there's nothing to learn from an event, let's say for example in times of psychological stress, noticing who among your friends come to your aid and in what way tells you a lot about their character and who you can lean on when the chips are down. As John Churton Collins said, in prosperity, our friends know us. In adversity, we know our friends. Personal development can also fall under this category. For example, developing a skill as a result of adversity. The reframing here might be something along the lines of, this company takeover is messing with my entire workflow, transformed to, I'm developing new skills to add to my skill set and make me more of an asset in the future. Maybe there was a shortcoming or failure to respond to something bad happening. Maybe this is a wake-up call that tells you you need to develop the skills necessary to ensure that this doesn't repeat itself. That skill doesn't necessarily need to be vocational either. We could be talking about coping mechanisms in times of tragedy. Adversity and trauma have been great mechanisms for me to develop the skills of dealing with them. I try to treat them like the raw materials used to forge strength. The key is to remain open to learning and adaptability, even in the face of adversity. This transformative process allows us to reshape life's setbacks into stepping stones towards a brighter future. Innovation is about recognizing the opportunity in misfortune. It's not limited to learning or development. This could be a moment that you seize that was previously cloaked by what you've lost. It could apply in multiple facets of life. Even after a breakup, the reframing could be, even though a relationship has ended, I now have the capacity to connect with old friends or discover new interests. I may have lost a person in my life, but I've found a lot of time that I previously didn't have, and an increased emotional capacity for different activities. Another example might be being made redundant at work, and it might seem like the end of the world. But it also might be the perfect opportunity to start that business you've been talking to your friends about after one too many gin and tonics. Napoleon Hill said, "Every adversity, every failure, every heartache carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit." And now onto marketing. This is the story you tell yourself about what has just happened. It's about identifying or imposing a positive spin on a bad situation by highlighting the positives that already exist. I think this is one of the most important skills to develop, as I've realized that the more frequently I notice the positive aspects of a situation, the more likely I am to automatically identify them in the future. Yes, this skill compounds itself naturally. Please do not confuse this cognitive restructure as an instruction to lambast your Instagram followers with shit inspirational memes you chalked up on Canva. This is genuinely about controlling the narrative. So a story that kind of lives in my head rent-free was one told by Rory Sutherland many years ago on a podcast. He was talking about arriving in a city and landing in the airport in a plane, and unfortunately there was no air bridge for the plane. So the pilot gets on the PA and says, "We've got good news and bad news." He said, "The bad news is we don't have an air bridge. The good news is the bus is going to take you all the way through to customs so you don't have to walk through the entire airport." Rory turned to the person next to him and thought, "Oh, that's actually really convenient." But then he thought again and said, "Wait a second, that's always true when you don't have an air bridge." So what the pilot was doing in this situation was kind of manufacturing a positive outcome for all the passengers. Even though it was always true that when you don't have an air bridge, you have a bus that takes you all the way through to customs, the fact that he framed it as a binary bad news and good news actually made everyone focus on the good news and not the bad. Another domain that's really useful, which is governed by the marketing department, is humor. Now, have you ever had a situation where there's just one bad thing after another happening and it starts to get almost comical? You think to yourself, or you turn to a friend and say, "We'll laugh about this someday." Well, try making that someday the day after. The better you get at crafting these situations into funny stories to tell others, the more the event becomes an asset and the less it happened in vain. A perfect example of this is the worst DJ gig of my life. So the story began with actually staying in a motel that made it look like we were about to get murdered. And then we went to this venue that was just really awful on the coast. There were like 2 people on the dance floor. We were accosted by some bikies at one point. Chris almost got punched by one of the only 2 people that were on the dance floor. The speakers were like computer speakers. The whole thing was just the worst gig of my life. If you actually want to hear this whole story, it's a full chapter in my book towards the end. I recommend you grab it. It's kind of funny. But the point is, as this was going on, I remember saying to Chris, what more can go wrong? Like nothing can go wrong. And as I said that, more things went wrong, to a point where the whole situation was humorous. Now, I told that story to people days and weeks and months after, and it really resonated with them and everyone found it really funny. So I decided to put it in my book. Now, you could argue that the best way to be the alchemist in this situation was to recalibrate our evaluation methods for future venues, and we did do that. But what was more helpful was to detail an amusing disaster story about the entire account. So sometimes when I find myself in one of those situations where everything is going wrong, I begin recording all the events in my head and crafting a story that I can tell people, which would be amusing to them. It's amazing how many times this actually turns a really horrible day into a funny anecdote that can make people smile. Humor can be one of the best ways to deal with challenging times, and it's way more important than you think.
So remind yourself this every day. If you can learn from past shortcomings, if you can develop skills that will help mitigate your fears and challenges in the future, if you can recognize opportunity previously shrouded by hardships, if you can control the narrative and find humor in some of the worst situations, then you, my friend, are an alchemist.
This episode's quote comes from the one and only Albert Einstein, who said, "We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them." So the way I interpret this is that we need to shift our thinking and our framing when dealing with problems in our lives. Sometimes we need to approach adversity differently to what we're used to. Even though challenges or misfortune are often caused by external forces, their effects happen only within you. And sometimes framing them differently can be the best way to ameliorate them. And that's all from me.